Iowa City is a unique community. This uniqueness is shaped by the people who contribute their ideas and their time and their energy to the life of Iowa City and the university. Welcome to a series of biographical interviews of special women and men who have affected this community. Their contributions have been valuable, their lives creative and full. What brought them here? Who influenced them? What contributions are they the most pleased about? These and other questions will be explored during this series of interviews entitled, Tell Me Your Story. Dr. Christian E. Schrock, fondly known as Chris, has had a long and rewarding history with this community. Born in Iowa City in March of 1920, Chris attended Iowa City schools, the University of Iowa, and graduated from medical school at Iowa in 1944. Dr. Schrock has practiced internal medicine in this community since 1954. He's credited for encouraging and recruiting specialists to practice at Mercy Hospital. Many of his colleagues have stated that Dr. Schrock was the first non-surgical specialist to practice high-quality medicine outside of the University of Iowa. Friends and professionals describe Dr. Schrock as a leader, determined, very thorough, an excellent judge of character, a fine physician, and possessing boundless energy. Dr. Schrock served on the Airport Commission, the boards of Mercy Hospital, and Mercy's Foundation. He was president of the medical staff at Mercy and is currently chair of the Mercy Center Board of Directors. He's a member of Gloria Dei Lutheran Church, AOA, Phi Beta Kappa, Rotary, and numerous state and national medical organizations. Chris and his wife Dottie have raised 5 children in Iowa City: Jerry, Sarah, Dan, Kathy, and Margie, and there are 10 grandchildren. Welcome, Chris. I'm going to call you Chris.
You should.
Tell me your story. Your story begins in Iowa City. You're like Irving Weber. You were born here. What brought your grandparents to Iowa City?
Well, that's really kind of an interesting story. My grandfather actually came out south of Iowa City on the farm following the Civil War, and he was a Mennonite. But he didn't stay with the group, but moved into Iowa City and started a construction business. Well, in those days, the men, they ate in boarding houses, and some of them roomed there as well. And Grandpa was a nice young man, and the lady who ran the boarding house had a little niece over in Alsace-Lorraine and thought would be just fine for Grandpa Harry. And it wasn't really an arranged marriage, but as a matter of fact, she, with a few pictures, she came over here and they were married, and as far as I could tell, they had a really great life. And of course, my father was their offspring, and he was an only child, and he was born and raised in Iowa City as well. Mm-hmm. My mother's story is a little different. Her father came to this country in his 30s. He was the 3rd son of a landed family in northeast Germany, near Lübeck. Mm-hmm. And I think the way things were set at that time, he didn't get any of the land, so he had to make his own. And he also made the mistake of falling in love with the governess, who was in the home to teach them English. So he came to this country, and how did he get out here? Well, there was a German community in Clinton, New York. And I think his tag, and he didn't know much English, said Clinton, and he ended up in Clinton, Iowa, instead of Clinton, New York. He worked on the railroad section for a while, and eventually saved enough money to get a farm out here east of Iowa City. And when Mother was 4, she came over here with her mother and brother from Germany. And of course, then they met actually in the church, is where people had their social life in those days.
You grew up on Governor Street?
Yeah, I was born there, as a matter of fact. You know, I talked to some of my friends, says, well, we were born in East Hall, which was in University Hospital, but not everybody was born in the hospital those days, and I was born on Governor Street. And I think that's a significant thing, because there were things that were opened up to me by virtue of that geography, and I ought to mention. Governor is just a block west of Summit. And Summit Street was a high prestige area, and the affluent families lived there. And as a result, the next door neighbors, as it were the offspring of these families, and they had a different lifestyle than we had because my father was a weekly wage carpenter. And they also went to the same school, Longfellow School. And I think I got a chance to meet these very bright young men. And I think I brought a picture about the safety patrol at Longfellow School, showing quite a few Iowa City characters.
Name some of the characters in your class at Longfellow.
There's Marvin Chapman, who is Judge Ansel Chapman's brother. And there's Dick Fedderson, and Dwayne Means, and Arlo Rogers. All of those Iowa City people were in this particular safety patrol. They're on this picture. Isabel Montgomery was my third grade school teacher. She taught me how to add and subtract. Isabel was a great teacher, and you know, she still is living, and she lives at Oak Knoll and kind of helps run things out there.
What is she, about 100?
I don't know how old she is. But there's a funny story about that. She taught Greg Bozek, who's one of my younger partners, and we work in the same office area. And one morning, Isabel was in there seeing Dr. Bozek, and she looked and she said, well, she said, I can't believe it. She said, I've had both you guys as students, and she had.
Longfellow.
Think about it. Boy, that's really dedication.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, when did you start? You have a talent that maybe a lot of viewers don't know, that you are or are a bassoon player. And did you start at Longfellow?
No, music was pretty big. This was actually this was 1932 and 33, which was right in the middle of the Depression. And things were tough. But music happened to be something that we could get into, and there were people in Iowa City at that time, because of the university again, which influenced their coming here, that were very able teachers and the like. And in 7th grade, a lot of us were started on wind instruments. Jaime Voxman was my teacher of clarinet, later was a professor of music and head of the department. And he eventually, in a couple of years, when I needed a bassoon player, switched me onto that. Now that was a good thing, because there weren't too many bassoon players around. And that enabled me to get into small groups. And as a matter of fact, when I was a junior in high school, because of the fact there weren't very many bassoonists, I was playing in the university orchestra, which was a great opportunity in one way. Philip Greeley Clapp was a real character, was a conductor, and he taught you something.
He directed you? Excuse me?
Yes, he taught you something about discipline.
Okay.
So that was a real opportunity there.
And you went to competitions, didn't you?
Oh, yes.
National band competitions?
It was different. I don't know if they still have this, but there they had regional and state and national contests. And I think our orchestras and bands went to one year to Des Moines, Madison, Wisconsin, Cleveland, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, and it was a great thing for the kids. We went on the trains, you know, raised money for these trips, and they were great experiences. I think the first time I saw my wife was in Madison, Wisconsin. She was a timpanist, and I remember Warren Berger and I went back there and watched the Mason City High School Orchestra. And here was this nice-looking little girl pounding on the drums. And I saw her later when she came to the University of Iowa.
Okay, well, I would ask you how you met, how you asked her out for that first date, but...
Well, I can't remember that detail, but it had to do with the University Orchestra. She and I both played in that. Okay. And I'm sure you know how those things go. I can't remember the hour or day.
So do you still play at all, just for fun?
That's kind of a loaded question. I still have a bassoon. I bought one, well, I didn't have one for quite a while. And I bought one about 15 years ago, and Dick Kaplan set up some chamber music groups, and that was a lot of fun. Actually, unless you're working at this all the time, you can't do it. And my fingers don't exactly go over the holes as well as they used to. If they're curved a little, they didn't used to be.
Tell me.
Would I like to? Yes. Someday I might do that more.
Okay.
I think you can pick that up.
Sure. Tell me what made you go into medicine? You said your father was a carpenter.
Yes, he was, and he also played the Englert Theater here in Iowa City used to have a pit orchestra, and my dad played bass viol, and he played accordion, and he had some musical talent. But he decided early on that that wasn't really a way to make a living. He said, well, it's fine to be in music, but you better do something where you can make a living if you can. And I fortunately was able to get into medicine, actually, in a decision at that time, which I thought was a wise one to make. I had some abilities in science and the like.
So after you
I
finished
wasn't driven by anybody.
behind you,
Yeah, that's right.
After you finished your specialization in internal medicine, you practiced in Waverly.
Yes, I did. And that's
What brought you back?
well, that's what brought back to.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about Waverly.
Okay.
Your residency training in a hospital teaches you how to take care of patients who are horizontal. They're sick. But taking care of ambulatory people on a long-term basis is really another discipline. And I was blessed, again, to go into a small group in Waverly called the Rolfe Clinic. And Herb Rothy, who's Kathy Clifton's father, the finest man and physician I've ever known, was there as the head internist. And he taught me a lot about patient care and how to take care of people. And I'll forever be grateful to him. He taught me to get up early in the morning.
Yeah, right, which you're notorious at doing.
Yeah. No, I think I went there because Kathy, who was working here at the time and going with Jim Clifton, thought that I might be compatible with her dad. She suggested I go there, and I did, and I was there for 3 years. And
Was it Scanlon who urged you to come back here?
well, Iowa City didn't really have any practicing internists that time, and Dr. Scanlon, we're talking now about after the Second World War, the late 40s. He was visionary enough to realize that specialization was the way things were going to go. And he encouraged Dr. Steinler and Dr. Alcock and later Dr. Doolin to come over to Mercy. These were all in the surgical specialists, and he really wanted to have an internist in the worst way. So when John Greenleaf, who was a urologist at the time, knew I was looking around while he was on the phone, and George Scanlon was on the phone, and I was down here, and we decided to make that move.
But there's a wonderful story about
yeah.
you didn't have much money, and of course
No,
you
we didn't.
had
Well,
no patients yet.
We came down here. We had 2 kids. Excuse me, we had 3 kids and another one on the way at this time, and we needed a bigger home. And Dottie looked around, and she didn't like anything she saw, and we didn't really have many options because we didn't have any money. I mean, I had a couple old beat-up cars and $3,000 or something like this.
Rich man.
So she looked at George Scanlon has this big home, and there were just the 2 of them. They'd lived there for many years, and he wanted to really bail out of that. And he said, well, you ought to go out and look at our place. So Dottie looked and said, well, that's the only place I see that's worth the money, $35,000. Okay. So I said, well, George, Dottie likes your house and she wants it, but I can't afford that house. He said, well, that's okay. He said, just give me the money I have, and you can pay me the rest when you start making money. And that was on a handshake, and we later wrote up a contract, but it never was a problem. And he moved out in 10 days so that we could move in, and I think that's really fantastic.
That's remarkable.
You know, that man really had a heart of gold. A lot of people.
Tell our listeners
well,
and viewers a little bit about Dr. Scanlon.
Well, first he was a visionary in understanding what was going to happen medically, and he really, I think, was very influential in seeing that Mercy Hospital got itself on the course that it did with getting younger men, getting young specialists, and also on the expansion program. And the other thing that he did that was, I think, terribly important was tried to get the, quotes, lay people, in contradistinction to the religious, involved in the advisory boards of Mercy Hospital. And George Scanlon, I think probably it was in 1964-5, set up the first lay advisory board of Mercy Hospital, which I think was a big thing for Mercy as it turned out, because that's blossomed out into many other things. You know, and I'll tell you, he was a very overpowering type of person, as a good surgeon usually is, and he was a big enough person to step back very gracefully, and I've taken an example from him.
Very good. You have been a part of Mercy's history from the time it was run completely by nuns. You bridged that over to now it's run by a lay, almost by a lay.
Except the sisters really still keep a vital interest in that hospital, and They do oversee to a degree how things run in a financial way. Now, that doesn't mean that they send money out of town. They don't. It's not that kind of operation at all, but they want to see that the mission of mercy, the religious mission of mercy, is carried on. They haven't turned this thing over in the sense of the word it's like a public municipal hospital. They're there, not running the place. When I was an extern over there as a medical student, there was a sister on every floor all the time running the place, and they really had a hands-on operation. They don't have the sisters to do it anymore.
What was your association with Sister Bernarda, who was the Mercy Hospital administrator?
Well, Sister came here, I think it was in the late 60s, and she was looking for somebody who'd been there a while, and I happened to be on the lay advisory board, and I think she was looking for somebody that she could communicate with and wasn't going to be difficult and obstructive. And I think that maybe I filled the bill. On top of that, we had a pretty good sized group by then. I think we had 6 or 7 doctors, and that was a pretty major piece of practice, and I think she respected that fact. And that was kind of an ongoing relationship. I enjoyed watching her run with the ball, because she went ahead with the remodeling, and Sister Janetta before her in '72 did the first remodeling, and then Sister did the '82 project, which was a nice project and a big one. And you know, at the time I thought, gee, she's spending way too much money, the rates are going up. But as you look at it retrospectively, it was very, very wise. And of course, her final act, I think, was also a good one. She has a New Mercy Hospital plaza. She was had enough foresight to know that Plaza Center 1, that Market Center Square, was a piece of real estate that Mercy really needed at almost any cost. And that's worked out. It's a nice, to me, it's a nice setup right now. I really enjoy looking at it.
I talked to somebody who said that when you were thinking about coming here, that a lot of people said, oh, you'll never make it, and you're crazy to come, and now look what's happened to the staff. And
times change and everything. Dr. Randall, bless his heart, an OB man, used to be a head OB, lived right across the street from us on Lexington, and he'd delivered Dottie of her second child, and he came over after we moved in about 2 or 3 months, and he said, and he talked to Dottie. She was out sweeping the walks like she usually is. He said, well, I'm sorry you really came, because you know Chris is really not going to make it here. It's going to be, and Dottie says, well, that's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about him killing himself, working. So you see, they have a different perspective, and that's all right. But I think it was primarily the academic people who looked at it that way, and they wouldn't appreciate what could be done. I learned all those tricks up in Waverly, though. See, I knew that could be.
I want to move away a little bit from medicine. Many people don't know that you're a pilot.
Well, that was kind of an accident, too. And another thing that happened just because I happened to be born and raised in Iowa City. Back in 1938, I was a freshman, I think, I was a sophomore in liberal arts school. The government was tuning up, I think, for World War II, and they set up a program called a Civilian Pilot Training Program, in which they'd give you 50 hours of instruction, which is enough to get a license. Well, I thought that looked like a pretty good deal, and I signed up for it, and old Paul Shaw, who still lives here in Iowa City, gave me my final, well, he passed me on my last examination as far as the flight test is concerned. Well, then that course went dormant because it cost a lot of money to fly, but when we came back here after a couple of years, Jerry Howe, orthopedic surgeon, was always a big flyer from way back, and he talked to me and he said, well, let's get an airplane together. So we did. We got a nice Beechcraft Bonanza, and we had that together for quite a few years. Then he eventually bought a twin, and I kept the Bonanza. And then the pilot and the airplane both got old, and we got out of that. But I think that if I really had all the time in the world and all the money in the world, I'd probably arrange to get a little airplane just to fly nice mornings on Sunday just to see the scenery. It's great. Nothing like it.
Looking back, Dr. Schrock, what person or event has had a major influence on you?
That's really kind of hard to say because I've been in a lot of different areas. I really think that it was my mother's influence in many ways, as far as the work goes concerned, that really got me onto working hard at what I do and doing what I do well. She was never sympathetic with carousing around. If I stayed out till 2 in the morning, she got me up at 6. And said, well, if you could stay out then, you'd get up early. So she pushed me. And the other person, I think, in my medical life who probably would be a toss-up between Herb Rothy and Lou January. Both of those people I knew well and worked with, and I think both of them were tremendous physicians.
Looking back, what contributions you've made, so many to this community, is there one that you're especially pleased about?
I really think that I'm most pleased about the fact that Mercy Hospital now has physician and lay representatives on the governing board of the hospital per se. I think that that's a necessary thing in a community where there's only one private hospital, that the people get involved in it. And I think this was accomplished partly because, well, other people pushed it beside me, but I certainly went along and thought this was the thing to do. And as a matter of fact, I alluded to the advisory board. One of the things Sister Bernarda did was to then have people actually on the governing board of the hospital, which was something that didn't happen before. See, Bill Somerville's on there, Byron Ross has been on there, and there have been other, and I think that's terribly important for a community hospital. Keep in touch with what other people are thinking.
When you started out in your practice, I want to just jump back to you, and you came here when Scanlon urged you to come and you moved into his house. Your first office was in the Federal Building.
Federal Savings and Loan Building. It's renamed now, but it's the same building. It's on the corner of Clinton and College, the southeast corner.
Okay, and then you moved.
We were there. I was there alone, then George Anderson came with me after a year. Okay. And of course, here the two of us are pushing each other around in 600 square feet, which is pretty tight. And then we built a building at 131 Capitol, which is now the University Security Office. I always thought that was a good-looking building. And we practiced there for 10 years, and we...
Just the two of you, or did you take in some more
O.C. Beasley came with us when we moved into that building, and then there were 5 of us when we moved out of that building. Carl Larson and Tom Nicknish were both there then.
And then you moved out to Towncrest.
Then we built the place in Towncrest, and that was 1968 we moved out there. And if it weren't so difficult, with zoning and requirements and all this and parking requirements, I think that it's time for a new building, but you can't really do it these days. It costs too much.
How many in the practice now with you?
It's very little the last couple of years, between 12 and 14.
Now you and Dottie, your wife, whom you met or you saw playing, was it the drums?
Yeah, kettle drums.
Yeah, you raised 5 children in that Dr. Scanlon's house, didn't you? Tell me a little bit about where they are located.
Well, our oldest son went to St. Olaf College and graduated from University of Iowa in medicine and went out to Tufts and took his training in infectious disease. And he's been in practice in Minneapolis now. And very busy practice. Sally, our oldest daughter, is in Denver. Her husband's in real estate development and this sort of thing. And while he was getting his graduate degrees at Ohio State, she went ahead and got her PhD in career counseling, so she's pretty well educated. Dan is an attorney, and he's in Providence, Rhode Island. Kathy, our second daughter, is married to Paul O'Lean, who's on a dental faculty at the University of Minnesota, and they live in Minneapolis also. And Margie, the baby, she's 33 years old.
Okay. It's a baby.
She's in Des Moines and married to a dentist, Larry Nelson.
That's a baby.
And we, of course, they all have some kids, and we really enjoy this.
Well, they did something very special for you when you and your wife celebrated your 40th wedding anniversary.
They put one over on us. On our 40th wedding anniversary, they did this all surreptitiously, and they arranged to have all these guests out at the Highlander. They had a big party. And as a matter of fact, that night, Paul and Kathy came and picked us up and said, well, we're going down to Quad Cities for dinner tonight. And on the way out, we stopped at the Highlander for something, and here all these people we really didn't know.
Oh,
and that was kind of tear-jerking.
I would imagine. That was a lovely, lovely gift.
Yeah.
Is it true, Dr. Schrock, that you and your wife could hardly wait to turn 70 so you could not have to pay those lift tickets?
Well, no, but that's the only thing I found out good about getting old. That's, you know, if you have to get old, there ought to be some benefits, and that's one.
About
Free lift
tickets.
Yeah.
You have to reach 70 for a lift. Tell me, where did the skiing? You two have been avid skiers for as long as I've known you.
Well, you know, we kind of get in a rut on a place, and we took them out to Aspen, starting, I think, in 1967. I think I have a picture I brought along
Good.
when the first year we took the whole crew. We couldn't afford that now. It's possibly expensive for that many people, but we could then, and we took them every Christmas, I think, for 15 years. And of course, then they got married and boyfriends and the like, but we still have gone with them. 2 years ago, we went with our oldest boy and his family, and 1 year we went with Kathy and Paul, and we don't dare miss a year, because at this age, if you miss a year, you're dead. You're not coming back.
Come on. So you still go every year?
Yeah, we're going in March.
That's
As
wonderful.
my mother would say, God willing.
God willing. Well, I think that's what, and I did see the picture of you two skiing, and that's a wonderful picture. Aside from your skiing and piloting, what are you have and your music, your bassoon playing? You've been an avid tennis player also.
Yeah, you know, that was another spin-off by virtue of being brought up in Iowa City. You know, when I was a kid, tennis was a sissy sport. I mean, really it was. And on Summit Street lived Paul Travis, Lee Edward Travis's son. He was head of the psychology department. They were from the East. And Paul, Dad was a tennis player, and so Paul had to be a tennis player, and he had to have somebody to play with. It was me. And I got to play tennis through high school that way. And of course, I think any sport you start young enough, well, you can get pretty good at.
So you're...
You know, my wife is a pretty good tennis player, and she just dying to beat me, and she's a very competitive person. So, finally she got to beat me, but I was really a cripple when she did. She said, well, that really isn't any fun to beat a cripple. So we just kind of knock them back to each other anymore.
Okay. I still know your reputation is of your energy, and you've gone half-time now, is that correct? Mm-hmm. But everyone says that you've always gotten up at 5:45 every morning and are one of the first people to make rounds. Are you still getting up at 5:45 even though you're halftime?
Well, you can't break. You know, it's like a fire horse. When the bell rings, they run. No, I get up early, and it's a funny thing. I don't go to the hospital except to pick up reports. I don't see patients except socially. You have to be neat about that because you can't make any exceptions. And it's funny, though, a lot of these older people have the same bad habits I do, and many times I'll drive up the office at 10:07 in the morning, there'll be people waiting there to see you. Isn't that funny?
So sweet. So what are you looking forward to? My final question is, you know, now that you're halftime, and I'm sure you're filling up your hours with lots of
Yeah, well, you know, I've always loved medicine. I really like what I'm doing now, but sometime you have to decide enough's enough. I think when I quit seeing patients, I'll probably get tied up in some other sort of thing. I mean, there are patients you can visit and do this for the good of nursing homes and this sort. I think I'll stay into that sort of thing if I'm able to get there, so to speak.
I think if you're going skiing in March, I think you'll get there. Well,
like John Kelly says, why don't you get a handicap sticker with your bad knee? And I said, I can't get a handicap sticker and go ski at the same time. That isn't the way it's run.
That's right. Well, on that note, I thank you for being my guest on Tell Me Your Story.
It's been a pleasure.
My guest on Tell Me Your Story has been Dr. Chris Schrock. Dr. Schrock, a native Iowa Citian, has practiced internal medicine at Mercy Hospital for over 37 years. Dr. Schrock has influenced many as a friend, advisor, physician, and medical community leader. He has served on many Mercy Hospital boards and the foundation. As Chief of Staff at Mercy, he worked diligently and energetically to provide quality medical care for area patients. He led the way for diversification of medical specialties in the private sector of the Iowa City community. Husband, father, grandfather, pilot, skier, physician, Dr. Schrock's energy, intelligence, and leadership have truly made a difference in this community.